New team, but the same result as Miami has another fourth quarter meltdown. Why do the Heat struggle against good teams? And Nikola Jovic is injured. Who should replace him in the lineup? We'll answer that and more in today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about Nikola Jovic's injury and who replaces him in the starting lineup, plus a stat that really shows who this Miami Heat team is. But before we jump in, we want to remind you of the Locked On Heat watch party, February 28th, this Friday night at the Taurus in Coconut Grove for the Heat's game against the Pacers. Tip-off is at 8 p.m. Come watch the game with us, hang out, take advantage of an extended happy hour, which we're going to need if the games keep going the way they are, signature cocktails, great food, and hopefully we will watch another Miami Heat win. So we are looking forward to seeing as many of you there as possible.
Absolutely.
Recording this on Monday morning after another tough Heat loss. They were up on the Bucks by 10 at halftime, David. They were up 8 going into the fourth quarter. Then Tyler Herro sits the first few minutes of the fourth. The Bucks take the lead. Tyler Herro's 12 fourth quarter points couldn't save them. The Heat were outscored 35-20 in the fourth quarter. And David, I thought Tyler was awesome in this game. 40 points on 12 of 27 shooting, got to the line 14 times, scored from everywhere. But it's becoming more and more clear that the Heat don't have a consistent form of offense when Herro's on the bench. He plays the entire third quarter. The Heat build that lead. He has to sit at some point. He sits at the start of the fourth quarter, and the Bucks kind of creep back into this game and then take the lead. And that's the number one thing that they have to do to solve if they are going to climb out of the play-in mix and make the playoffs is what's our offense when Tyler Herro is on the bench? Would you agree?
I think that's part of it, but I have to be honest with you, rewatching the quarter and Milwaukee went on a run there where they really separated themselves. There was kind of neck and neck there after they had taken the lead. Miami comes back and they're trading buckets basically for most of the fourth quarter. And then the Bucks just kind of catch fire and go on a spurt there. I think it might have been an 8-0 run or something along those lines where they just were able to pull away.
Was
and
that
Miami
the Kevin Porter?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
7 points and 2 assists in a couple minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have concerns about their defense. And I think, you're trying to kind of figure out what the lineup should be, a closing lineup that can play defense at a high level. And they just didn't have it. I don't know. I don't know which is the problem necessarily, whether it's the offense or the defense. We've talked a number of times before how the defense has for this team and this iteration of this team historically been one where the defense feeds the offense, leads to easy transition buckets and things of that sort. So I totally acknowledge the fact that the offense is a problem, but defensively, they're just not able to get crucial stops in key moments down in the fourth quarter, and it usually winds up resulting in a loss. So it's both. As far as the offense is concerned, yeah, the easy finger to point is that Terry Rozier. He comes in replacing Tyler Herro. He doesn't score. He doesn't do much of anything. He doesn't defend well. He doesn't score. Again, he doesn't generate any kind of offense for anybody, and that seems to be the biggest problem. But it's not just on Terry. There are other players with whom he shares a floor, and they don't seem to have anything that they can go to and say, okay, this is our source of offense. It's not just giving the ball to Tyler, letting him go to work.
Mm-hmm.
What else is there? You can't do that with Bam necessarily. He was, I think, out for most of that spurt as well. Wiggins, you're running him through the low post, seeing if you can generate some offense, but that's not nearly as effective. There just doesn't seem to be anything consistently offensively, and then it leads to bad shots, turnovers perhaps where you just bobble the ball or you mispass it or something like that. And then defensively, you lead to miscues on the other end as well. And it just kind of seems to feed each other where you wind up going on these just minutes of really bad level basketball. And we've talked about this before. This team isn't good enough where they can afford to play that badly in key stretches, especially when you're on the road against good teams. And that's what happened on Sunday night against Milwaukee.
So a couple of things that I want to hit on there. You mentioned how historically we have thought about this Heat team as the defense feeds the offense. And I know that
Yeah.
that's something that the players talk about all the time and what Eric Spoelstra talks about all the time. I've always been a little dubious about that.
Yeah.
I've always felt a little bit more like the defense looks a lot better when the offense is making shots.
That's fair.
And when the offense is making shots, the other team has to take it from out of bounds. Miami can set up defensively in the half court, and they can kind of get into the matchups that they want to get to. And I think for this team, that's always been really important because they've historically played with multiple bad defenders in the lineup, basically at all times, whether it was Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson, some of the wings in the past, like whatever it might be. And I kind of felt like that was the case in this game too, where they're missing shots on offense. They go 1 for 8 from 3-point range. You end up with these long rebounds off of those missed 3-pointers. Now Milwaukee is out and running. Milwaukee is and historically has been a very good transition offense team. So when you're giving them those long rebounds and they're able to get into the open floor, the defense looks a lot worse.
That's fair.
And so I've kind of pushed back against like the party line there in terms of we're a defensive first team and we need to feed that offense. Obviously, all these things are super connected, but I do feel like we don't talk enough about how when this team doesn't make shots, all of a sudden defensively, they just don't look as good.
That's fair.
And I thought that's what happened a lot in that fourth quarter. Like I said, 1 of 8 from 3-point range in the fourth quarter in that game. But then the other point you made, I think, is a really good one. Like these other guys do need to step up, and it's not just Terry Rozier. And I know there's people on social media who love to just poke at Terry Rozier. And by the way, he has been bad, right? He is not without blame here, but he's not the only one to blame, right? You look at Wiggins, plays only player to play all 12 minutes in the fourth quarter for Miami, 2 of 7. You just need more from him, right? You need more from him in that spot. Bam, he was okay. I thought there was moments where he could have maybe taken over a little bit more, although, Tyler Herro ended up taking a lot of shots. He ends up taking 10 shots in that fourth quarter. I didn't really mind it. There was a couple shots that I didn't love from him, but from in the grand scheme of things, I was okay with his decision-making in this game. Davion Mitchell, he's one of these guys where you say, we're going to hang our hat defensively, but that comes with a sacrifice on the offensive end for Davion, who just has a really hard time consistently making shots. Duncan Robinson doesn't take a shot in his 3 minutes. Kel'el Ware doesn't take a single field goal attempt in his 10 minutes in the fourth quarter. And I thought they tried to find him on the lob a couple times, and Milwaukee did a good job of snuffing that out. But you've got to find a chance to get Ware for those easy lobs in the fourth quarter when you're low on offense. And Spo actually came out of a timeout after a couple of bad possessions and tried to get Ware to that lob. And Herro runs a pick and roll with Ware. Milwaukee doubles Ware or kind of builds that wall in front of him and Herro. And then Herro kicks it out to Wiggins, who misses a 3. So they tried to get it to him, but they got to do a better job of doing it. So it's just to me, it's what's the recipe? What can we get to over and over again is one thing. But the other thing is sometimes in the fourth quarter, the plays, like whatever Spo draws up, doesn't really matter. And eventually a player just has to step up and take over. And I look at Bam and I'm like, it should probably be him. It should probably be Bam and Tyler figuring out a way to take turns and dominate the fourth quarter, at least offensively, so that Miami is an answer, and so that it's not just sort of whack-a-mole every single fourth quarter, every game, saying, okay, who's got the hot hand besides Tyler Herro? Because that's just not feasible.
Is it a ball handling issue? Like in terms of like getting Ware easier looks? I know a lot of people want to point to the point guard position. They don't have a true point guard, et cetera. Do you see that as one of the major issues in terms of not having that table setter who can generate those easy looks? Like for all the warts on Kyle Lowry's game, at least was something that he could do fairly effectively, is that he was going to try to get the big man going, whether it was Bam or somebody else. And they don't really have that. Davion is still kind of figuring out his footing. Tyler's doing an admirable job in that regard, but they don't really have anybody else to kind of play that pick and roll situation with Ware effectively, and they don't have an option on the roster.
Yeah, they don't have a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander type, or even like who's just super, or a Luka who's super ball dominant, has so much gravity, within 10 feet of the basket that you have to double them. Like Tyler, as good as he is, he's not that guy, right?
Right.
And then they don't really have the Kyle Lowry, Chris Paul type, who's just this amazing entry pass guy who could just play all the angles and all that stuff. They don't really have that guy. I think that's part of it. Yeah, I think if you were to pair Kel'el Ware with a true table-setting point guard, that'd be great. Those guys just don't really exist anymore. Yeah. Like Lowry, Mike Conley, Chris Paul, these guys are aging out. I don't know who you point to in the league who's like, yep, get that guy as a table setter, but maybe that's the next step here. And I actually have a stat about that a little bit later on, about the kind of next thing that the Heat need to figure out and find this offseason. But before we get to that, the Heat have lost 5 of their last 6 games, and as if this loss was not bad enough, it sounds like they're going to be without one of their most important players for a while. We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon until midnight. Game day feast. Look, after an epic 50-point performance, you can celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot delivered straight to your door. Sometimes you're just having those late night cravings where you're staying up watching highlights or just need a midnight snack. You can use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big, or maybe you just want lunch on the go. If you need a quick and easy lunch the next day with Dash Pass, you get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. So sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon until midnight after a 50-point game or on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms to apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Your favorite NBA team is a free daily newsletter introducing the Locked On Heat newsletter, one stop for ultimate Heat and league coverage with local analysis and amazing writing from Katie Heindel, Mike Shear, and Locked On fantasy basketball tips from Josh Lloyd. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. A couple stats before we get to the injury news. The Heat have been outscored by 15 or more points in the fourth quarter in 3 of their last 6 games. Oof. The Heat have now blown a double-digit lead in 14 losses this season. This is a trend. We've talked about it 100 times, and as if blowing another lead wasn't bad enough, now it looks like Nikola Jovic is going to miss a lot of time after he breaks his hand in the first half of this game. No timetable. We'll see if we get anything specific, because we rarely do from this organization, but he is going to see a specialist on Tuesday, and then they're going to figure out if he needs surgery. So that's going to determine whether or not he's going to miss a lot of time or just sort of a bunch of time, I guess. But he's going to be out for a while here. But David, this is the guy, Nikola Jovic, who you and I pointed to before the All-Star break as one of Miami's most important players in the stretch run of this season, a guy who we thought needed to take a leap after the All-Star break, and now he's out for what sounds like is going to be a really long time.
Yeah, it's a blow, no doubt about it. Because he's a guy who generates offense. You've got the size out there. He has the fast break opportunities when he pushes the ball up and collects the rebound, et cetera. So, I mean, you're missing a lot of versatility with the loss of Nico, and it's a very unfortunate situation for him because he was playing better and he was having a pretty solid season overall. He'll come back. Who knows if he'll come back in time to help Miami's playoff push or whatever they might be on towards the end of the season. Might be staying in the play-in tournament. Who knows? But as far as the loss, it's a significant one, and I think you're missing a lot in Nico and what he's able to provide. And even yesterday, you saw against the Bucks, he's out, and you still have a number of options that just didn't get any playing time yesterday. And so somebody's going to have to find a way to step up. And I know that's a point that we'll make here, but there doesn't seem to be any easy answer as to who can replace Nico, because I think he is kind of one of one on this roster in terms of everything he can generate offensively and the size that he adds defensively, where he's much improved. And I think that's something worth noting as well.
It's such a great point, right? Because that's what makes him so intriguing as a prospect. He's 6'10" with ball handling skills, can make good passes. When he's shooting well from the outside, it transforms Miami's offense. And this is what we talked about going into the All-Star break was, if he could just be that consistently for them, if he's scoring 10 to 12 points on a game basis, we're not asking for the world here. But when he's like that, it just transforms everything that Miami does. And even in this game, he was 3 or 4 for 7 points. He was a plus 10 in this game before being ruled out at halftime. It's clear how important he is. And in Miami's rotation, they start with Bam and Kel'el Ware. Nico comes in as one of the first subs, and then they're always able to play Nico with Bam or Nico with Ware. And it's very similar to what you see something like Minnesota used to do with Towns, Gobert, and then Naz Reid comes in as that spark plug off the bench. And they're just sort of mixing and matching like these 2 of the 3 guys at all times. And they have 2 of those 3 guys on the court at all times. And so there's always 6'10" or higher size on the court for Miami. And now that goes out the window now. Yep. And you're always going to have Ware or Bam on the court for the most part, because they're going to start and then they're going to stagger those guys at center going forward. But now you kind of go back to being undersized.
Yep.
Because you just don't, when you're not having Bam and Ware on the court together. And that's going to be something that they're going to have to figure out there, which, look, it's not the worst thing in the world because you're starting big with Bam and Ware, and then you do go kind of more skill ball, if you want to say, when you go smaller, but it's just a matter of somebody else stepping up. But before we get to who we think could step up, in terms of how long Nico might be out, this is going to be a while.
Yeah.
And like I said, this Heat organization very rarely gives any types of specifics in terms of a 6 to 8 week injury or anything like that. I mean, I remember even when Tyler Herro broke his hand,
right,
the most we got from in the playoffs in 2023, the most we got from Spo was he'll be out the next game.
Yeah.
and then we'll see, and then we'll go from there. And I'm like, oh yeah, really? I thought so. So Nico, kind of visibly upset after the game, and understandably so. Credit to him for even talking to reporters after the game. But when Tyler Herro broke his hand, so this is being labeled as Jovic broke his 5th metacarpal, fractured rather his 5th metacarpal. Okay, I couldn't tell you the difference between the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, or the 5th metacarpals, but there's several of them in your hand. Herro, when he broke his hand, he fractured his 3rd and 4th metacarpals. So twice as many metacarpals. Now, again, don't know if there's a difference between the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th, or if there's a difference between fracturing 2 versus fracturing 1. I'm just telling you what the information is. Nico, and so Nico fractures his 5th metacarpal. Herro fractured his 3rd and 4th. Herro went out. He was out from the beginning of the playoffs to the end of the finals. And we remember he was sort of maybe going to be available if he could extend that final series. I don't know that was ever going to be the case.
Right.
But Tyler Herro was out for 2 months. Okay. So let's say Nico is out for 2 months here. That takes the Heat right to the end of the regular season. So I'd expect him to not play until at least April. Again, unsolicited medical opinion here, but I'd expect him to miss at least all of March at this point.
And it kind of adds some sense of urgency for the rest of the team. I know it's not, they're probably doing everything they can to do this anyway, but if they can avoid the play-in tournament, that gives them a brief layoff as these other teams are in the play-in tournament, so that you could add a couple of days there to his recovery time, and maybe he'd be available for that first series against whatever opponent they're able to face. So, I mean, if anything, there's an added sense of urgency now where, again, you're trying to give yourself a chance here, but this team, looking that far ahead, looking at the possibility of saying, we're playing for the 6th seed now just so we can give Nico an extra week of rest. It doesn't matter. This team just isn't good enough at this point
where they can afford to do that. Regardless of the motivation, just win as many games. But in terms of who replaces Nico in the short term here, Kyle Anderson got the second half minutes in that game. Didn't score, but I thought they were able to run offense out of him. They had a couple of plays where they would put him in the low post and he would try to facilitate out of there. I thought he made some really good passes in that Toronto game Friday night that we haven't talked about. Down the stretch of that game. Jaime Jaquez, Haywood Highsmith, Pelle Larsson, they didn't play last night against Milwaukee. Those guys right now are on the outside of looking in on the rotation. I figured, though, I think Kyle Anderson probably gets the Nico minutes tonight against Atlanta, but they could experiment with Jaime, maybe. This might be the door for Jaime to get back into the rotation. Who would you go with, though?
I still feel like Haywood Highsmith has a role to play on this team. And then we're talking about defensively, especially in the fourth quarter issues and things of that sort. I know you're not going to get much offense through him, but I mean, that's kind of incumbent on somebody else. Find a balance. Try to find a rotation where you have Tyler and Haywood come in at the same time midway through the fourth. And then you're all of a sudden getting a boost offensively, and you're providing us that spark offensively that this team desperately needs. Because Jaime, I think he can fill in some of that versatility that Nico provides, but his offense has been so inconsistent for most of the season. He's kind of bouncing back from injury. He hasn't been 100% for a long stretch this year. I think those are your two best options. I don't know that either of them are great. It's going to be by committee, and that's something that Eric Spoelstra is kind of reluctant to do. He doesn't really go with that. He's like, oh, this is my rotation. I'm going to stick with it until my dying breath. And it's like, well, okay, but if you're 0 for 7 out there, you kind of have to go with somebody else. And I think that's where it's kind of incumbent on Spo to find that right combination of players mid-game where he can make those kinds of necessary adjustments and find the right player for the right situation. I mean, last night he didn't play at all. Haywood should have been out there. I mean, again, you're hemorrhaging points offensively. You need to be able to generate a stop. You can't get your best perimeter defender out there for a couple of possessions and see if you can force a turnover or harass X player into doing something and maybe leading into a turnover. There's got to be some minutes there. And I don't like, we should never be at this point where Haywood Highsmith is viewed as the savior, but he could certainly help. He's helped before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm at. I think
kind of like
provide
it.
Some. Yeah.
I like it. I maybe you do go with Highsmith. To me, it's either Kyle Anderson because you're at least getting size there. He's 6'8". He's big. He's stronger than he looks and all these things. And he's been in the league for a long time. He knows how to handle these situations. I'd go either with Kyle Anderson or Haywood Highsmith. To me, Jaime Jaquez has not earned it to this point.
Yeah.
And Pelle Larsson, that's not the right player at the right spot. As much as we like his energy, it's just we're talking about replacing a 6'10" guy. So there is this other stat that I found that I think explains exactly who this Heat team is. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, or maybe not in some cases, maybe an opponent's fourth quarter comeback when they're playing Miami, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. It's easy to use FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether you're backing your team or you're watching a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch spree. You never feel like you're missing a chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. You just visit FanDuel.com and join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. With Sunday's loss, the Heat fall to 8-20 this season in games against teams currently with a winning record. 8-20, David. They are 4-10 against teams with a top 10-point differential. So this team does not beat good teams.
Yep.
There's a label that's out there that the Heat also lose to teams that they're supposed to beat, and that's just not entirely true. I think the losses obviously are louder and stand out more. But they're 15-5 against teams with a bottom 10-point differential. This team, and that's one of the best sort of marks in the league among teams against teams with bottom 10-point differentials. For the most part, this Heat team is exactly who we think they are. They are good. They beat the teams that they're supposed to beat, and they lose to a team with a winning record. We're not talking about the Celtics or the Thunder or the Cavs, like these teams with awesome records.
Yeah.
A winning record, a game over 500. This team has a really hard time beating those teams too. And it's such a strange thing because you would think that you'd be able to kind of get more of these wins against teams that are either, not world beaters, but maybe a couple games over 500, maybe struggling with injuries or whatever. But they continually find ways to drop these games, even when they're leading by double-digit points in these fourth quarters. And so I think we can kind of, we obviously have to do the analysis and the what and the why of everything. But at the end of the day, it's pretty remarkable how I feel like I could just look at the schedule and predict the wins and losses just based on the other team's record. If they're a game over 500 or better, the Heat are probably going to lose that game. If they're one of the worst teams in the league, the Heat are going to take care of business. They're probably going to win that game.
And it's so unfortunate because these games on the margins, facing these kind of mid-tier opponents, that's exactly the kind of games that you've got to win. No one's expecting you to beat the best teams in the league. Like, everybody wants to point to that Cleveland win from earlier this season. Fantastic win, great job, etc. That's months ago now. That's in the rear view mirror. It's these teams where are just good enough where you have to find a way to beat them because there's eminently beatable. They have weaknesses. They're not a top tier team. As you said, they're either going through injury, they might have a player out, they might be dealing with some kind of internal issues, or maybe they just, like Milwaukee did, traded a couple of key players and now they're kind of incorporating a new guy like Kyle Kuzma. Like, there are things there that you can exploit, especially when you've got a double-digit lead late in the game. There's no excuse for blowing these. These are the ones that you have to win as a group, and they've just lacked that understanding, that sense of urgency that we've come to identify as being a key trademark for this group over the last few years of what you would probably term the Jimmy Butler version of this group since 2019. They've always seemed to find a way to win these kinds of games. That's not the case. That's not the case. And I know it's not just because Jimmy Butler's no longer on the roster. You can't just pin this specifically on Bam and or Tyler or anybody else in this roster. But collectively, you've got to find a way to hold off these opponents, because these are the ones that you have to win if you want to avoid the play-in tournament for an 18th consecutive season or whatever it might be.
And let's not pretend. I tweeted something yesterday that the Heat, Tyler Herro has evolved into this basically complete offensive player. He is. Sure. It's remarkable the leap that he's made this year. If it's not working from three, he's got 2-point. He can get to the basket. He got back into the mid-range against Milwaukee a little bit more. He was drawing, to your point, got to the line 14 times. Like, this guy has evolved into a complete offensive player, or at least as complete as he's capable of being.
Yep.
But this team really needs that other sort of offensive fulcrum here. And I tweeted that out, and people were like, well, Jimmy Butler. Let's not sit here and do revisionist history. Jimmy Butler was not doing that for Miami. That was the problem that the Heat had with Jimmy Butler for the last 2 years, was that they didn't know whether that Jimmy Butler was going to be available or not, if there was going to be an engaged and motivated Jimmy Butler down the stretch of these games or not. And just because Jimmy's now doing it in Golden State let's not pretend that he was doing it in Miami, right? And so the Heat have needed that guy for a couple of years now. And Tyler Herro making this leap on his own just isn't enough. And when I look at this team, they just don't have that closer. We mentioned like a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or a Luka Doncic type, a guy with size who puts so much pressure on the defense. Like, as great as Tyler Herro is, he's not that kind of closer necessarily. I think he can make big shots, but it just feels like the Heat really struggle to generate that stuff outside of Tyler Herro. And that's sort of the big problem. Now, before we kind of zoom out too much here, the Heat do fortunately play the 26-31 Hawks tonight and then on Wednesday night. The Hawks have lost 3 in a row. They've lost 6 of their last 10 games. They're struggling. They basically sold a bunch of players right before the trade deadline. So this is a chance maybe to get right with a couple of games here that the Heat really need to get. But I had this thought during the game. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts on this, David. Is this Miami Heat team just the 2022 Cavs before they traded for Donovan Mitchell? That team was 44-38, finished 8th in the Eastern Conference. They were built around Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen. We're dealing with a lot of the same concerns that we're talking about with this Heat team. Didn't really have that closer as good as Garland was. A nice young center in Mobley. The Heat have a nice young center in Kel'el Ware that they're excited about. They were running those 2 big lineups with Mobley and Allen even back then under J.B. Bickerstaff. The Heat are running their 2 big lineups right now. And there's stuff that you like they had Karis LeVert on that roster, but he was starting. They had Larry Markkinen in that group, and he was starting, and when they were like super jumbo. But then they ended up moving a lot of those pieces to get their closer, to get Donovan Mitchell. They trade for Mitchell, they win 50 games, and they finish 4th the next year. I'm wondering if the Heat are those 2022 Cavs. If they're, hey, we've got the pieces here, we're just missing that crown jewel, so to speak, that can kind of turn us into this middling 8th place in the Eastern Conference team to a team that can win 50 games a season and do it relatively easily, because ever since the Cavs made that Mitchell trade, they have been an automatic 50 wins. Yeah. And I'm wondering if the Heat are just that one piece away where if they get that one crown jewel, everything else just sort of clicks into place.
It makes a lot of sense. It's a good parallel, one I hadn't considered, and yet it also seems kind of like no duh. Like, you get that superstar player, and then I'm not knocking you at all.
No, I know.
But the reality is just, if you could get that one guy, and that's what Miami's been missing for a while. It's not Tyler. It hasn't been Jimmy, except for the playoffs on occasion. Like, you get that one guy who can be the source of that consistent offense, and that changes everything, especially if you're able to keep the right players around him. And so, it makes absolute sense.
Are we overcomplicating everything? The Miami Heat have not had a regular season superstar in 2 or 3 years.
You got to go all in
And
on
that's it.
Anthony Edwards. You got to go
Right.
all in. Somehow, find a
Whoever
way
it
to
is,
pry him out of
Edwards
it.
would be phenomenal, man. Like, we could talk whales if we want to talk whales, but to get back to that stat that we were talking about against top 10 and bottom 10 teams, the process is surprising, blowing these double-digit leads. The results are not surprising. A middling team beating bad teams, losing against good teams. The results of this entire season have not been surprising. It's the process of blowing these 10-point leads in the fourth quarters that is surprising. But if you just look at the schedule when this thing is over, it's like, yep, all of that makes sense. You lost against Oklahoma City Thunder. That makes sense. Not taking into account that you were up by double digits against the Thunder for a lot of that game.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the weird part of this season. But I do wonder, to your point, are we just overcomplicating it? Is all of this just, oh, no, duh. You're a team with a lot of good players, a lot of 2s, 3s, and 4s in the pecking order, but no number 1s.
Right.
And until you go get a number 1, why should you compete with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Giannis or LeBron or Luka or Jason Tatum or Donovan Mitchell? Like, why should you compete with any of those teams? Right?
No, it just doesn't seem like they can't.
Right.
And it kind of, I know we've talked about this before, and this is, the team has probably given a lot of people, myself included, a lot of false hope, because there's always, well, they can flip the switch, or they, Jimmy in the playoffs, etc. Well, Jimmy's not on this roster. You don't have that option anymore. And I think this team is going to be exposed, unfortunately, because they're just not good enough. And they've got, as you said, they've got the mid-tier players, they've got the 2s, the 3s, and 4s, but you need that number 1.
They're like a band with like an awesome drummer, a great bass player, like a pretty good
lead
guitar
singer
player,
sucks.
but they just don't. Yeah, the lead singer just can't carry a note, and you're like who's gonna hit? Like, we just need somebody to sing "Living on a Prayer" in our cover band, and we just don't have anybody that can hit the high note. We just can't do it.
Somebody's back karaoke lately.
I was big into karaoke a few years ago, not so much anymore, but that's a different topic for a different podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.